Hello there, Rabbi. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, Joe. Do you like my new study?
Very becoming. It reminds me of the time that I was at the Library of Congress, a very beautiful building. If you're ever in downtown Washington, you should definitely make a point of going over to the Thomas Jefferson Center Library, which has the main Library of Congress, and see the beautiful windows and ceiling tiles and paintings and colonnades and marble floors. And that is where I met, or had the very great privilege of meeting, Congressman John Lewis. And we shook hands, and I drew a cartoon of it that appeared in a Post column, along with a bunch of others about John Lewis. And he shook my hand, and he said he was very pleased to meet me. And he said words that I will never forget. He looked at me in the eye and said, "You do something, right?" And I said, "Well, not that much. I try my best." And he said, "But you do something." And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "That's good. Go out and do some more." And so every time I find myself in a situation where I should be confronting oppression, or just, it's easier to stay quiet or observe the status quo as opposed to trying to stick my nose into something, I have this clear vision of John Lewis looking at me, wagging his finger at me. So I've had many conversations since that moment about the value of protests versus inaction versus actual action. The January 6th uprisings, and what did that accomplish? What did the violence do except destroy people's faith in the system? Where does all this go? Where is talk appropriate, and where is, as Woody Allen once put it, good to go out and get some bricks and some baseball bats and make your point?
Or pitchforks and torches, depending on where your village is. What comes to my mind are the teachings of the Hebrew prophets. You know, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Amos, that whole group of biblical prophets.
Those guys.
Yes, there was a common thread. Justice delayed is justice denied. They constantly preached against the kings of Israel and Judah, against the excesses, against the waste, against inappropriate use of taxpayer money. All appropriate today. Everything that the Hebrew prophet said, we could pull out today. But let's focus on this: justice delayed is justice denied. And if we take that theme, if we want to look at January 6th, if we want to look at Palestine, if we want to look at Serbia, Croatia, anywhere on our planet, if we want to look at our inner cities, we keep coming back to people have legitimate complaints and we just ignored it. We didn't provide opportunities for jobs. We didn't provide opportunities for education. And by delaying the fair treatment and justice, it continues to ferment. And at some point, people get madder than Hades, and they resort to bricks and bats and give up on discussion. I'm not condoning it. I'm not accepting. I'm just pointing something out. And I've said before, don't kill the piano player, because I'm bringing something you don't want to hear. We can look at what's going on in Israel. The early Zionists, there were several of them who said, we need to address the indigenous Arab Muslim population in Palestine. And the early Zionists said, we will do that, but right now, the situation, we have to resolve the situation. We have to create a Jewish state. Well, that was in the 30s. And the same group of individuals raised the same into the 40s, into the 50s, into the 60s. And the answer was always yes, but. And now we're seeing the result of the inaction, of the injustices done and not resolved. There is a point where history teaches us people will resort to pitchforks and torches. and they will give up on the discussion. And the way to prevent the pitchforks, the bats, and the bricks is to address injustice when we first see it. Providing jobs, providing supermarkets. Here in DC, we have areas where there's nowhere to buy groceries except a 7-Eleven. It's grocery unfair, unreasonable. And then when people take up arms or start acting out, we attack them, we do all kinds of things, rather than stop and go, wait a minute, let's take a look at how we got here. Usually, bricks and bats are not the first resort. They usually come out when everything else has failed, even if a resolution isn't reached, even if it's being done. As what you said with John Lewis, do something. So if we're actually providing for a Palestinian state, for the rights of Palestinians, if we are providing for the rights of people in different countries, different religions, in Africa, in our inner cities, if there's process going on and there's progress, people won't resort to bricks and bats. And it's very sad that we won't start at the same thing happens in classrooms. You have children misbehaving and acting out. And when I look, it's because it's boring. You're boring the kids. And the material is totally irrelevant. I woke up I'm going to be 76, Joe. And I woke up this morning and realized another day has passed and I didn't use trigonometry. Wouldn't it have been nice if they taught me in school balancing a checkbook, investing in the stock market, how to read charts, something I could actually use instead of something that's in my personal life worthless. Now, if you're going into certain fields, then you can study it. But there's no reason to impose it on all of us. And so we wonder why kids misbehave, why kids are upset. Let's, again, going back to the Hebrew prophets, justice delayed is justice denied. So let's start by looking at how we're treating people, how we're dealing with not problems, because they wouldn't be problems. Let's look at how do we deal with things going on in our society? How do we deal with people feeling disenfranchised?
Today, we are dealing with war in the Ukraine. Russia is invading. People are protesting in Russia against the Ukrainian invasion. People are protesting in DC against the Ukrainian invasion. Is that doing any good? Is it accomplishing anything? Should we climb the walls of the Russian embassy and haul out the ambassador and say, listen, do something? Is there a point where discussion stops and action needs to be taken?
I think it's really simple. Make the country a NATO guest, a NATO partner. And let's stop it, because it's gotten beyond discussion. It's gotten beyond talking about it. Children are being murdered. I saw it on TV. Women are being raped. Homes are being pillaged. So it's beyond the discussion. It's beyond the embassy. It's now time for making the Ukraine a guest member of NATO, of making it a no-fly zone, and standing up to Russia and saying no. And because they started with arms, the only way to stop it is going to be with arms. The discussion period is over. It's over. And we can talk later about, well, we didn't or did or what we, let's leave that and talk about the now. And we do need to do something, which means sending in, if not our troops, then NATO, a no-fly zone. Because Russia isn't going to stop with the Ukraine, and we're just watching people being murdered and tortured. And once they take over, they're just going to haul everybody away and kill them. And what are we going to do? Wring our hands and say, oh, this is terrible. Oh, the horrible Russians. No, this is a time for bricks and bats. And we tried discussion. And had we let them join NATO originally at the beginning, Russia never would have invaded. So right back with my discussion, justice delayed is justice denied. Had we accepted them in NATO, Russia never would have invaded. So none of this would have happened. but we kick the can down the road. Another example. And we can continue with the American Revolution, which, as you know, I talk about as the first American Civil War, because, dear listener, more American colonists sided with British than with the rebels. So it was our first Civil War. Had England agreed, oh, you know what? Yeah, the taxes, there are some things that are, taxation without representation is not reasonable. There never would have been a Civil War or revolution. Never would have happened. But justice denied, justice delayed, justice denied. We're right back to the Hebrew prophets again. And I could spend whatever time you want me to spend looking at events in history where people had legitimate complaints that were not addressed, that were poo-pooed and pushed aside until the critical mass happened and people just get madder than Hades.
So to play devil's advocate, are you saying that sometimes you have to just throw the rules out the window and go punch somebody in the nose?
The problem with that is you'll do that before we do any. No, what I'm saying is we need to address the injustice. We need to address what's going on first. And if none of that works, and if we actually are trying, I don't mean what most politicians do, and that's pay lip service and say they're going to do something. And we're watching that with schools and school boards. People are annoyed with school boards and what's going on in education. And yet the school boards aren't addressing it. And people are getting angrier and resorting to more violence.
Yes, but let's get back to the subject at hand and protesting and stuff like that. Okay, so I think the point of intelligent discourse is to avoid conflict. And I like the saying that the person who throws the first punch is the one who's lost the argument and is trying to get their way by force. So the question still becomes, is protest, violent, assertive protest, the best way to make your point or just to get attention? Or is it a failure of trying to make your point logically? Or do we assume at one point people are not listening to a logical argument, and so we must dismiss them and then go ahead and show them the error of their ways?
It always has a bad outcome. Again, when we look at history, when people have resorted to violence as the first choice or along the chain, it just gives the other side the excuse to annihilate, to use more violence, and you don't get the outcome you want. What I'm offering is a solution. So we don't have to get there, so people don't get irate and angry. But it's never the first choice. And even if it's down the road, it never works because everyone just digs in and will use more violence against the other side. And whoever wins and loses, you've now created a we and them and adversarial, and it just continues through the centuries, the Hatfields and McCoys.
So just protesting for the sake of protesting is not really the point. You have to have meaning and purpose behind your actions and a logical argument.
And then we have to get into the halls of Congress or on the school board or the local government to start changing the policy and the rules so that the injustices are dealt with and changed. And if we start resorting to bricks and bats, then no one's going to listen to the reasonableness or the logic or that you have a good case. We're just going to treat violence with violence. And again, if we look at world history, it just leads to more violence.
Well, thank you for those words of wisdom, Rabbi. I'm sure John Lewis would appreciate them were he here to comment. And wouldn't it be great to have him as a guest if we had that time machine we're always talking about? But thank you.
Well, when my DeLorean gets out of the garage, I will pick up John Lewis and we can have a discussion with him.